Hello, travelers and monster catchers abound. I am Stella Ferris, and this is the Monster Catchers Journal podcast. Today's episode is about a remarkable glyph known as Kefleh, one made entirely of stardust. Our story begins in the courtyard of Luan Academy, where the sun bathed the stone walkways in warm golden light. It was one of those rare days when the weather was too perfect to ignore, so Professor Orion had moved the lecture outside. The students sat in a half circle on the grass, their notebooks and hollow tablets balanced on their laps. Some took notes, others doodled absent-mindedly, and a few simply struggled to stay awake as Orion droned on about the dangers of glyph catching. "Glyphs," he said, adjusting his spectacles, "are not just creatures to be tamed, they are unpredictable forces of nature. Each one is a mystery, some friendly, some hostile. And others, well, even the archives fail to categorize them." He cleared his throat and gestured towards the sky. "That is why we must always approach them with caution." Ronan, a young apprentice with a wild mop of black hair, rolled his eyes. "Professor, we get it. Glyphs can be dangerous. But what about the ones that aren't? The ones that just exist?" Orion gave him a pointed look. "Are you volunteering for an example, Ronan?" The boy hesitated, then smirked. "Sure, why not?" The professor sighed and turned to the class. "Very well. Let me tell you all about Kefleh, the starborn glyph." The students straightened in their seats. Stories about rare glyphs always made for better lessons than long lectures. Orion clasped his hands behind his back and gazed at the sky, as if recalling a distant memory. "Kefleh," he began, "is unlike any other glyph you've recorded, or anybody's recorded. It is not bound by flesh or bone. It is made entirely of stardust, a being that drifts between worlds, shimmering like a fragment of the cosmos itself. It doesn't attack, nor does it flee. It simply exists, as if observing us from beyond time itself." A soft murmur ran through the students. A glyph made of stardust that wasn't something they heard of before? Well, that was very interesting. Professor Orion continued, his voice growing softer. "The first recorded encounter with Kefleh happened right here in this very courtyard. It appeared one evening floating above the academy, its form shifting like a nebula caught in the wind. Those who saw it described a sense of deep calm, as if they were gazing into the heart of the universe itself." "Has anyone ever caught one?" a student asked. Orion shook his head. "No, and perhaps it is not meant to be caught. Some believe Kefleh is not a true glyph, but a celestial echo, a memory of something far older than the world." A hush fell over the courtyard as the students absorbed the tale. Even Ronan, who usually had a witty remark, remained silent, staring at the sky as if hoping to catch a glimpse of the starborn glyph. Professor Orion smiled, sensing the shift in the class. "Now," he said, "tell me, what would you do if you encountered Kefleh?" The discussion followed was far livelier than any lecture could have been, and as the sun began to dip towards the horizon, some of the students swore they saw something glimmering in the sky just for a moment before fading into the twilight. Ronan smirked and crossed his arms, leaning back on his elbow. "Well, first, I would set my glyphit down and let it prepare itself," I said confidently. "Then I'd distract Kefleh, giving my glyphit an opening to capture it while it's not paying attention." A few students nodded, and I felt a small surge of pride until Professor Orion sighed and waved a dismissive hand in my direction. "That won't work," he said, shaking his head. "Kefleh isn't a creature bound by the same physical laws as most glyphs. It's made of stardust, one of the strongest and most elusive components in the known solar system." I frowned, my confidence slipping. "So what you're saying, it's impossible to catch?" Orion gave me a knowing look, the kind that meant I had walked straight into one of his lessons. "Not impossible," he said, "but certainly not something brute force can accomplish. Kefleh is not a creature you battle into submission. You cannot trap it with a standard glyphid, nor can you contain it through conventional means. It is more like a whisper of the cosmos, a living fragment of the universe itself. To catch Kefleh, you must first understand its nature." I sat up straighter, intrigued. "And what exactly is its nature?" Professor Orion clasped his hands behind his back and paced slowly. Kefleh is drawn to harmony. It moves like a comet through the sky, following celestial energy flows. It doesn't respond to aggression or fear. It responds to resonance, to balance. He stopped and pointed at me. If you truly wish to catch Kefleh, you must synchronize with it. You must become a beacon of equilibrium, attuned to the cosmic forces it follows. I blinked. You're saying I have to meditate my way into catching it? A few students chuckled, but Orion remained serious. Not exactly, but you do need to present an energy that Kefleh finds familiar. Starborn glyphs, unlike others, are not lured by bait or tricks. They are drawn to those who carry the same energy they do. I glanced around at my classmates, then back at Orion. Okay, so how do I do that? Orion smiled. With the right preparation, there are ancient methods, rituals, that align one's aura with the cosmic flow. A special type of glyphid exists that can assist in this process, one that acts as a conduit between the physical and celestial realms. If you truly wish to catch Kefleh, you must first seek out this glyphid and learn to harmonize with the stars themselves. The weight of his words settled over me. This wasn't just about skill or strategy, this was about something deeper. Something older than the academy itself. I swallowed hard and met Orion's gaze. All right, I said. Where do I start? The professor's lips curled into a satisfied smile. That, my dear student, is a lesson for another day. With Professor Orion being so evasive, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was withholding something important. If Kefleh was truly a glyph that required some special method to catch, then there had to be information somewhere in Luon Academy's vast archives. So, I took matters into my own hands. The Academy's library was a massive ancient hall of knowledge, filled with towering bookshelves that stretched so high they disappeared into the dome's ceiling. Luminescent runes flickered along the spines of certain tomes, indicating restricted or enchanted text. Rows of hollow tablets hovered in designated areas, but I knew that the real secrets, the ones Orion wasn't telling me, were buried in the oldest books, the ones that still smelled of ink and parchment. I searched for hours, poring through the books on the celestial glyphs, legendary encounters, and ancient catching techniques, most of them repeated, with Orion had already told me Kefleh was an enigma, a being of pure stardust, impossible to contain through conventional means. But that wasn't enough. There had to be more. Frustration gnawed at me as I reached the deepest section of the library, where the shelves and the dim glow of enchanted lanterns trailed along the spines of forgotten books until one title caught my eye. How to Catch Kefleh. My breath hitched. The book was old, far older than most in the library. Its cover was bound in dark blue leather, with faded silver etchings that resembled constellations. I carefully pulled it from the shelf and carried it to a reading alcove, where a single candle burned low. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the book. The first few pages described Kefleh, much like Orion had, an ethereal being, untethered to the physical world, moving through the cosmos as if it pleased. But as I flipped further, the text shifted from mere description to something far more intriguing. A starborn glyph cannot be caught by force, nor can it be bound by the technology of man. It exists between the seen and unseen, requiring a tether, not a chain, but of harmony. To bring Kefleh to one side, one must first call upon the resonance of the stars. I furrowed my brow. Resonance of the stars. Turning the page, I found a diagram, an intricate circle filled with symbols I didn't recognize. The notes beside it detailed a ritual, one that required more than just a glyphid. It spoke of aligning one's energy with the cosmic forces, of using a special kind of celestial lore, something crafted from the remnants of fallen stars. This was it. This was what Orion hadn't told me. Heart pounding, I traced my fingers over the ancient symbols. If this book was right, then catching Kefleh wasn't just about finding it. It was about earning its trust through an attunement, unlike anything I had ever attempted before. I leaned back, staring at the pages. If I wanted Kefleh, I had a lot more work to do. After reading the book, I knew what I had to do. If I wanted to catch Kefleh, I needed to find the celestial lure. a rare artifact crafted from the remnants of falling stars, but the book didn't say exactly where to find one. It only hinted that such materials were not of this world and were often guarded by forces that understood their true power. I spent the next day combing through the Academy archives for any mention of celestial relics, but most records only referenced meteorite fragments or old legends about starborn energy. I need something real. Then finally I found it. A passage buried in a dusty volume titled Artifacts of the Cosmos spoke of an ancient forge located deep within the Veil of Ethers, a hidden canyon where cosmic energies pulled, creating materials infused with stardust. According to legend, the forge had once been used by astral blacksmiths to craft artifacts that could channel celestial power. If the celestial lure existed anywhere, it was there. Without hesitation, I packed my things and set out. The journey to the Veil of Ethers. The trek was not easy. The Veil of Ethers lay beyond the Academy's protective barriers, deep within the astral waste, a region known for its unpredictable gravitational shifts and strange anomalies. The very air shimmered with cosmic distortions, and the ground pulsed faintly beneath my boots as if the land itself was breathing. As I navigated the rocky terrain, I felt an eerie sensation wash over me, like I was being watched. Shadows flickered in the periphery of my vision, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. Then, just as I was beginning to doubt the book's directions, I saw it. A rift in the mountains, almost invisible unless you were standing at the right angle. The moment I stepped through, the air changed. The usual hum of distant wind faded into silence, and the stars above seemed impossibly close, as if they were watching. Before me lay the Veil of Ethers, a massive glowing canyon lined with jagged black stones, its walls streaked with shimmering veins of celestial energy. At its heart, half buried in the dust, was what I had come for, the celestial forge. Approaching the forge, I saw the remains of old souls and inscriptions in a language I couldn't read, but the process to craft the lure had been described in the book. I just had to hope it was accurate. I carefully gathered the fragments of fallen meteors, each one humming faintly in my hands. The forge itself was cold, but as I placed the materials inside, a low vibration filled the air. The dust around me began to rise, swirling in luminous patterns. Then, with a sudden flash, the forge came alive. The celestial energy within the meteor fragments ignited, swirling together until they fused into a single glowing object, a small crystalline lure that pulsed with a soft blue light. It was lighter than I expected, warm to the touch, almost as if it were alive. This was it, the celestial lure. I clenched it in my fist, my heart racing. With this, I was one step closer to catching Kefleh. With the celestial lure glowing in my palm, I steadied my breathing. The book had said that using the lure was not about force, but about resonance, about aligning myself with the energy of the cosmos to call Kefleh from its eternal wandering. Standing in the open expanse of the Veil of Ethers, I raised the lure high above my head. The stars overhead shimmered, as if responding to its presence. Slowly, I closed my eyes and focused, feeling the rhythm of the lure's energy, syncing my heartbeat to its pulse. Then I spoke the words inscribed in the ancient tome. Wanderer of the stars, child of the endless sky, hear my call and reveal your light. For a moment nothing happened. The canyon remained eerily silent, the vastness stretching endlessly before me. Then the air shifted. A soft hum like the distant song of the cosmos resonated through the canyon. The lure in my hand brightened, its swirling stardust accelerating until it formed a small, spiraling galaxy. Above me, the sky rippled. A cascade of silver blue light poured downward, coalescing in midair as something began to take shape. Glowing dust swirled, forming delicate limbs, a sleek, elongated body, and two piercing celestial eyes that shimmered like the heart of a dying star. Kefleh. The stardust glyph floated before me, its body shifting and flickering like a nebula caught between existence and oblivion. Its presence was overwhelming, majestic, untamed, and impossibly ancient. It studied me with quiet curiosity, tilting its head as if measuring my worth. I barely breathed. This was the moment. If I moved too fast, I could lose my chance forever. Slowly, I extended my free hand, letting my energy remain steady. The lure pulsed in time with the Kefleh's form, resonating in harmony. I seek to walk the path of the stars, I said softly. Will you guide me? Kefleh's eyes flared brighter. For a heartbeat, I wasn't sure if it would accept me, or vanish back into the endless void. Kefleh hovered before me, its form flickering like a living constellation. The celestial lure in my hand pulsed in perfect rhythm with its energy, binding us in an unspoken connection. I knew this was my one chance. If I failed now, Kefleh would vanish back into the cosmos, perhaps never to appear before me again. Steadying my breath, I tightened my grip on the lure. The book had said that capturing Kefleh wasn't about strength or force, it was about synchronization. I had to align my energy with its essence, allowing the lure to act as a bridge between us. With slow, deliberate movement, I raised the lure towards Kefleh, the air crackling with energy. Kefleh's shimmering form pulsed in response, its body expanding and contracting like the birth of a new star. It hesitated for a moment, then, drawn by the lure's resonance, began to spiral inward. Threads of stardust unraveled from its body, swirling into the lure like a cosmic tide. A brilliant light engulfed us both. I felt a sudden pull, like I was being drawn into the fabric of the universe itself. The lure vibrated wildly in my hand, growing hot as Kefleh's essence flowed into it. For a moment I saw a glimpse of a vast nebula, ancient constellations and worlds untouched by time, then silence. The glow dimmed. The energy in the air settled. I looked down at my hand. The celestial lure, once a simple glowing crystal, now shimmered with an ethereal light inside. A small swirling mass of stardust moved in slow, deliberate motions, Kefleh's essence now bound to me. I had done it. I had caught Kefleh. A rush of exhilaration filled my chest. But I knew this was just the beginning. Kefleh was no ordinary glyph. It was a being of the cosmos itself. Understanding its power, learning to harness its abilities, that would take time. Clutching the lure, I smiled. Welcome to the journey, Kefleh. Now it came for the harder part, telling Professor Orion that I had caught. As I stood in the doorway of Professor Orion's office, my satchel slung over my shoulder, I had done it. I had caught Kefleh, the celestial being that had been the subject of so much mystery and fear. I could feel the faint pulse of the celestial lure against my side, its presence comforting in a way, but also strangely foreboding. I had expected Professor Orion to be proud. After all, capturing a glyph like Kefleh wasn't just rare, it was monumental. But the moment I opened the bag and revealed the glyphid, I knew something was wrong. Professor Orion's eyes narrowed as soon as he saw it. His usual calm demeanor shifted into something darker. His posture stiffened, and his hand instinctively moved to his desk, clutching the edge as if to steady himself. "What have you done?" he muttered under his breath, but it wasn't the praise I had hoped for. It was more like a prayer, as if he couldn't believe what I had done or what he was seeing. I pulled the celestial lure from my bag and held it out for him to see. The glyphid glowed with a soft violet hue, its stardust surface shifting in patterns that were almost hypnotic. At its peak, a small star-shaped crest pulsed faintly, like the heartbeat of a distant star. I had done it. I had caught Kefleh. Professor Orion took a step back, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. You captured it?" His voice rose, betraying a rare edge of panic. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" "I caught Kefleh." "Just like I was supposed to," I said, trying to hold back the anger building inside me. "You never told me how dangerous it was, just that it was hard to catch, and now I've done it." "You don't understand," he snapped, his voice turning cold. "Kefleh isn't just some glyph to be captured. It's a being of pure cosmic energy, untamable, unpredictable. You have no idea what kind of power you're holding. You've bound it to a simple containment device." "But you never told me how to handle it, Professor," I shot back, my voice rising in frustration. "You didn't give me any directions, any warning about what I was getting into. You made it sound like it was just some rare creature. But I did it. I captured it. I figured it out, even when you refused to explain anything." He slammed his fist onto his desk, his eyes blazing. "You think this is a victory?" he growled. "You think catching Kefleh is some kind of accomplishment. You've brought an entity from the cosmos into this world, something that should never have been tampered with. Do you have any idea what kind of chaos you could have unleashed? It's not a glyph anymore. It's a living force, a power beyond our comprehension. You could have destroyed us all." My chest tightened, a mix of guilt and anger swarming inside me. "I didn't know," I yelled, my voice cracking under the weight of the emotions rushing through me. "I didn't know it would be this dangerous, but I did it. And I control it. Maybe I'm not ready, but I did it." Professor Orion's face was pale, his lips pressed into a thin line. His usual calm, composed demeanor was gone, replaced by something raw and unguarded. He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on the celestial lore in my hand. "You're playing with forces you don't understand," he said, his voice low and trembling. "The power you've just brought into this world is not something to be controlled, not something to be tamed. It's something to be respected. But now it's bound to you, and there's no telling what that could mean." I took a step back, my mind racing. I had thought I had done something great, but now I wasn't so sure. Could he be right? Had I messed with something irreversible? The anger that had flared up inside me began to fade, replaced by a rising wave of doubt. What had I really done? "I didn't mean for it to be like this," I said quietly, my voice almost lost under the weight of everything he'd just said. "I just thought I could prove myself." Professor Orion exhaled sharply, his frustration disappearing for a moment as he looked at me with a strange mixture of pity and concern. "Prove yourself. This isn't about proving anything. It's about understanding the consequences of your actions. You think capturing a force of nature like Kefleh is some kind of achievement? What happens when that power turns on you? What happens when you lose control?" I looked down at the celestial lore, the glow of the glyphid reflecting in my eyes. For a moment, everything felt too big, too overwhelming. Maybe I had been reckless. Maybe I had underestimated what I was dealing with. But it was too late now. The connection had been made, and there was no going back. "I'll figure it out," I said, my voice steady despite the demeanor in his hands. Despite the tremor in his hands. "I'll learn to control it." Professor Orion looked at me for a long moment, his eyes studying me with a depth I couldn't quite place. Finally he spoke, his voice quieter than now, tinged with both concern and resignation. "You think you can? The question is, should you?" And in that moment, I realized that the journey I had just begun was far more dangerous and far more complex than I had ever imagined. My pyramid house had become more than just a home. It was a sanctuary for glyphs. Each room was a reflection of the care and attention I'd put into crafting a safe, harmonious environment for the creatures who lived there. The walls were adorned with intricate glyphs, each one corresponding to the different energy or elemental force, creating a sort of magical symbiosis between the house and its inhabitants. The sanctuary was designed with balance in mind. The energy of the glyphs flowing freely throughout the space provided them with a sense of comfort and security. The rooms were spacious, with large windows that let in the warm glow of the two suns above Nibiru. The air itself seemed to hum with magic, each corner of the pyramid buzzing with an energy that felt both ancient and alive. In the center of my home was the heart of the sanctuary, my meditation chamber. It was here that I would spend hours communing with my glyphs, understanding their needs, their powers, their personalities. The room was filled with soft lighting and delicate plants that glowed with a gentle bioluminescence. It was the perfect place for reflecting and connecting, and it was here that I brought Kefleh once I had tamed him. Kefleh, though a force of pure cosmic energy, had found his place among the others. Celestial lure, now a living glyph, it pulsed gently with his essence, radiating a soft violet light. I'd carefully placed the lure in the middle of the chamber, surrounded by symbols that resonated with celestial energy. Despite the immense power, he continued, Kefleh seemed to thrive in this space, settled into the energy of the sanctuary with an almost peaceful acceptance. Zena had recently moved in, assigned to help me manage the growing number of glyphs and to assist in maintaining the sanctuary. She was a practical and grounded individual with a deep respect for the creatures we cared for. Even if she didn't fully understand the complexity of the connection I shared with them, still, her presence was invaluable, and she quickly became an integral part of our little family. One evening after I had finished my daily rituals with the glyphs, Zena sat down beside me in the meditation chamber, her eyes fixed on the glowing celestial lure. "You've really bonded with him, haven't you?" she said, her voice soft, almost reverent. I nodded, watching as the light from Kefleh shifted, almost as though it was responding to her words. "It's not just a bond, Zena. It's more than that, I think. I think we're starting to understand each other. He's not just some creature to be captured and controlled. He's part of something bigger, part of the universe itself." Zena looked at me, her brow furrowing slightly. "Never seen anything like it. It's almost as if he's alive in a way the others aren't." "He is alive," I replied, my voice tinged with awe. "But not in the way we think of life. Kefleh is part of the stars, part of the cosmos. His energy is raw, untamed, and infinite." Zena paused for a moment, taking in all of what was just said. "You're responsible for him now, though. All this power, all this energy, is not just something you can control. You need to be careful." "I know," I said, my gaze drifting to the glowing glyphid. "But I can't turn my back now. He's a part of me, and I'm a part of him. We'll figure it out together." The room was filled with silence as both of us sat in the presence of the celestial lore, each of us contemplating the multitude of the connection I had forged with the cosmic being inside. It wasn't just a place for me and my glyphids to coexist. The sanctuary was where our energies intertwined, where we all learned from one another. This was my home, and in the sanctuary, surrounded by my glyphs, I knew we were all safe, but I also knew that with Kefleh's power came responsibility, and that meant learning how to live with something so much bigger than myself. A day later, I couldn't wait any longer. The time had come to release Kefleh into the sanctuary. The room was bathed in soft golden light, streaming in through the high windows of my pyramid house. The space was clear, ready for the celestial being to stretch his wings, metaphorically speaking, and experience his new home. With a deep breath, I opened the celestial lure, and as soon as I did, the starry glow spilled into the air, illuminating the space. Kefleh hesitated, his shimmering violet form lingering in the aura of the lure. For a moment, I thought he might hesitate, unsure of what lay ahead, but then, as if recognizing the freedom he had been granted, he floated free. Kefleh's movements were slow and deliberate at first, as if savoring the sensation of space. His form rippled like liquid stardust, a cascade of violet hues swirling around him. It was as if the universe had taken shape in front of me, a living, breathing being, made from the very fabric of the cosmos. The sight of him in the sanctuary was nothing short of breathtaking. As he floated through the air, the other glyphs in the sanctuary began to approach, drawn to his celestial presence. First to greet him was Orabeak, my golden scarab with a sharp, pointed beak of a duck. His body radiant and shining like burning gold, fluttered towards Kefleh, his wings creating a soft buzz sound as he moved through the air. Orabeak's large black eyes gleamed with curiosity as he cautiously approached the new arrival. His beak clicked in a strange rhythm, like a gesture of welcome. Kefleh's star-shaped crest flickered and he glowed brighter in response to Orabeak's presence. The cosmic hue within him shifted, resonating like a symphony of stars, and Orabeak seemed to respond with a series of melodic chirps, his wings moving in intricate patterns as though dancing to the cosmic tune that Kefleh was playing. The two seemed to understand each other. Instinctively, two beings from vastly different realms finding common ground in the sanctuary. As Kefleh explored further, his stardust form gliding through the air, I saw the shadows in the room shift. From the darker corners of the sanctuary, a shape began to emerge, a bird-like figure, darker than the deepest night. This was Shadowclaw, my glyph of shadows. Shadowclaw was a being of pure darkness, made entirely of shifting shadows. His form was a blur of black, only solidifying when he drew closer. His beak and talons, sharp and ominous, glimmered faintly with a strange ethereal glow, and his eyes, burning yellow like twin lanterns, fixed on Kefleh with an almost predatory interest. He was a creature of the night, always drifting in the shadows, and I couldn't help but notice how his presence seemed to make the very light in the room tremble. Kefleh, glowing with celestial energy, noticed Shadowclaw immediately. His starlight seemed to pulse in response, and for a moment the two stood at a distance, light and shadow, opposites drawn together. The room seemed to hold its breath, the air thick with tension. Shadowclaw's eyes narrowed, studying Kefleh, but there was no malice in his gaze, only curiosity and perhaps a touch of weariness. Slowly, Shadowclaw advanced his talons, clicking softly on the floor as he drifted closer. His body barely solidifying as he moved. Kefleh, seemingly unafraid, hovered in place, his violet glow pulsating gently, as though inviting Shadowclaw to come closer. And then with a sudden motion, the two seemed to meet in a silent understanding. Shadowclaw circled Kefleh once, as if testing him, his shadows swirling around them both. Kefleh, in return, released a burst of shimmering stardust from his body, creating a wave of light that swirled like a cosmic breeze, brushing against the shadowy form of Shadowclaw. It was a strange moment, light and shadow, two ancient forces, coming to a silent agreement. Shadowclaw's posture relaxed, the tension draining from his form. He wasn't afraid of Kefleh. If anything, the two seemed to complement each other, an unusual bond forming between them. The room, once filled with uncertainty, now felt harmonious. Orabeak fluttered around the two, his golden wings catching the light as he circled Kefleh in excited patterns, while Shadowclaw stood just behind, silent but ever watchful. They were together in their own way, light, shadow, and stardust, all coexisting in the same space. I stood there for a while, watching the three of them interact. The uncertainty that had weighed on my shoulders the night before seemed to lift. Kefleh had found his place. My sanctuary was not just a home for me, but for the Glyphs too. And now it was a home for me. It was a home for him. A celestial being from beyond the stars. For the first time since I had caught him, I felt a sense of peace settle in my chest. The sanctuary was no longer just a place, it was alive, filled with energy and connection. Orabeak, Shadowclaw, and now Kefleh were part of something much bigger than I could have ever imagined. This was only the beginning. A few days after Kefleh had fully settled into the sanctuary, I was in the process of feeding some of my other glyphs when I heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps approaching from outside. They were heavy and deliberate, like a slow march, and despite their casual pace, I knew exactly who they belonged to. I turned towards the entrance just as the door swung open, revealing Professor Orion standing in the doorway, his tall, broad frame casting a long shadow into the room. His gaze immediately swept over the sanctuary, his sharp eyes scanning the space as though he was a hawk, searching for its prey. He didn't say anything at first, but the weight of his presence was enough to make the air feel thick with tension. I met his gaze and gave him a small nod. Professor? Is it time? He asked, his voice smooth but edged with the quiet expectation that always followed. I've come for an update. I nodded again, though my chest tightened. The excitement of showing him what I had accomplished was tempered by the knowledge that his reaction was never predictable. Kefleh was a powerful celestial force, and it wasn't like anything Professor Orion had ever taught me about before. If I wasn't careful, I might find myself on the receiving end of another lecture. Without another word, I gestured for him to follow me deeper into the sanctuary. The soft hum of the place filled the air as we walked past the large open spaces where the glyphs roamed freely. As we reached the center of the sanctuary, I noticed that Orabeak and Shadowclaw had already taken their positions nearby. The golden scarab perched on a high platform and the shadow bird lingering in the darkness. But it was Kefleh who drew the professor's attention. Kefleh hovered near the center of the room, his shimmering violet form pulsating with stardust, his star-shaped crest glowing gently, casting an ethereal light that seemed to warp the very air around him. I could feel the pull of his cosmic energy, even as I stood a few paces away. The very room itself felt different from him. There, a living, breathing force of the universe in the flesh. Professor Orion's eyes narrowed as he studied Kefleh carefully, his expression unreadable. He stepped forward, slowly, cautiously, as if expecting the glyph to react violently. He had every right to be wary. Kefleh wasn't just another glyph. "Impressive," he muttered, his voice low but filled with strange admiration. "But it's more than that, isn't it? You've done something no one thought possible." I nodded, my gaze shifting to Orabeak and Shadowclaw. We both stood sentinel nearby. They were calm, but I could sense the gravity of the moment. This wasn't just an ordinary visit. Professor Orion had always viewed Kefleh as an anomaly, something dangerous and unpredictable. I hadn't been sure how he would react to seeing the celestial lure in its fully realized form. "Yes," I said, my voice steady despite the weight of his presence. "He's not just a captured glyph anymore. He's something more, something alive. I think the celestial lure changed him. He's a glyphid now." Meaning he's literally growing his own glyphid, which is a vessel for his cosmic essence. Professor Orion turned back to me, his piercing eyes glowing with intensity. He opened his mouth as to speak, but then paused. Taking a slow breath, he had warned me about the dangers of capturing Kefleh, and the last thing I wanted was for him to think I had done something reckless. "You've done well," he finally said, his voice softer than usual, but the caution in his tone was still there. "But you need to understand, Kefleh isn't like the other glyphs. You can't control him the way you can with the others. He is a force of nature, untamed and vast. You've given him freedom, but that doesn't mean he's fully yours to command." "I understand," I replied, my stomach nodding. "I'm not trying to control him. I just want to make sure he's safe. I don't want to lose control of him, or for him to lose control." "Good," he said, nodding slowly. "So remember, Kefleh is a part of the universe, not just some creature you can cage. His energy is infinite. You're dealing with forces you don't fully comprehend. You might be able to handle him now, but one mistake could spell disaster." And with that, Professor Orion seen his way out of my pyramid house. And that, my friends, is the story of how I caught Kefleh. As the stars fade and the night draws to a close, thank you for joining us in this cosmic journey. Until we meet again, may your path be guided by the stars and your heart filled with the wonder of the universe. Keep catching those monsters, and remember, adventure is never far away. And this was the Monster Catcher's Journal, and we will see you next week for the next episode.